From being named Alaska's Principal of the Year back in 2022 to being taken by force to a psychiatric hospital and forcibly injected with psychotropic drugs. That's what happened to Mary Fulp after she renewed her Christian faith and decided to live stream on Facebook her good news. However, family members hearing Mary say online that she could speak in tongues had them going to her home to confront her about it. What started off as a familial disagreement over religion soon took on shades of sadism, as some of the family members decided to call the cops to get their way, to accuse Mary of not being mentally well. But since Mary was the one at her own home and had done nothing wrong and was quiet in her sound mind, cops instead turned the question back around on the 911 callers, asking Mary if she would like any of them charged with trespassing. Mary declined to do so and says she just wanted them to leave, which they did, until one of them, or a few of them, officials are not releasing names right now, so I'm not exactly sure, got the bright idea to try another tact. Once again, contacting law enforcement a few hours later, these family members decided to bluff the cops, two cops that they had obtained a court order for state troopers to take Mary in for a mental health evaluation against her will. Here she is live streaming that incident.
I'm actually being taken away because I love Jesus and I've claimed Jesus' mighty name. And that's my sister and part of the family that is taking me. Where am I going? Okay. So 2 troopers showed up because I claimed the love of Jesus. That's how dangerous that is. The enemy does not like me claiming his mighty name. My goodness.
Now, that supposed court order was a lie, and the cops never looked too closely at the supposed papers, failing to do their due diligence in taking a copy. The Alaska court system has since confirmed it never issued any such order. And so, these family members with a vendetta against Mary had her put in an involuntary psychiatric hold for 3 days, which meant that her personal items, including a cross necklace, were confiscated. She was forced to undergo blood work, a CT scan, an EKG, and worst of all, was injected, as I said, with psychotropic drugs. Of course, these tests all came up empty because Mary was perfectly fine. This was merely a disagreement. Mary was not a threat to herself or to others. As you could hear in that clip I showed you, she sounds perfectly fine. She's now lawyering up to sue, and the commissioner of the Alaska Department of Public Safety has since apologized to Mary personally. Joining us now to discuss is business owner and libertarian activist Spike Cohen, the founder and chair of the nonprofit You Are the Power. Spike, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me on.
Great. So, I mean, this is probably the biggest million-dollar question, but how does something like that happen in America?
Well, unfortunately, it happens. It's a confluence of multiple things. Number one, it is the fact that very often, thanks to immunity, government actors can act with impunity. We don't know if these officers were poorly trained. We don't know if they were trying to help either family members or some other group to try to involuntarily commit or illegally. We don't really know because they haven't told us very much, but we know that they likely knew that whatever would happen, they're not really going to be held responsible for it. At best, they'll get some additional training or they've already given an apology, but in terms of it affecting their career or their financial outlook, it's not going to. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the fact that the government even has the power to decide whether or not you are mentally well enough to be allowed to stay in your own home. And that's a big problem because even if this wasn't abused, even if they had gone to court and gotten the order legally, she still wouldn't have been able to represent herself. This would have been done ex parte, meaning that this would have been done without her even knowing until troopers showed up. It's bad enough that that's available, but this was done completely illegally. But this calls to question why the government even has the power to do that in the first place.
No, that's exactly right. There's a lot of questions that we have and that, of course, we still want answers to, because when you read, it seems that either they showed a fake order or they bluffed the cops pretending that they had some type of court order. As you said, even they have gone through the judge. There's a lot of, legal questions there as well, or at least ethical questions, I guess I should say. But then again, the court system of Alaska says that they never actually issued an order. So of course, sadly, it seems the law enforcement officers here did not do their due diligence in checking to make sure everything was, legally done. Do we know if it was just a bluff, if they lied, and the fact that these family members, when they're having just a dispute about religion, it seems like that they feel that they can, use the state to get what they want. I think that's a very scary proposition, would you say?
It's extremely scary, and the answer is we don't know. What we do know is what DPS, Department of Public Safety, and ACS, the Alaska court system, said, which is that there was no court order and that she should have never been taken against her will, that they had no legal order to be able to do so. So the only crimes that we know of that were actually committed were the first one where when the family members went to Ms. Fulp's house and refused to leave. That was trespassing. She chose not to trespass them, which may have ended up turning out to have been a mistake. And then the second crime is whoever illegally showed a bogus court order to the police which they did not apparently take a copy of. They're refusing to say who gave them that order. They're refusing to give any kind of evidence as to why they did this. For all we know, the troopers decided to do this on their own accord. We have absolutely no idea. And for what it seems that we're going to be stonewalled on this and not find out. Hopefully, we do know that Mary has secured counsel and is going to be suing and seeking justice. Hopefully, the public will also find out exactly what happened in discovery or after the decision happens.
Well, it's scary just how easily something like this could happen. And just imagine having to prove a negative, having to prove your innocence, basically, because that's the position that people are put in. I mean, just imagine trying to explain, I'm not crazy. And then people are saying, yes, you are, and that's why we're taking you in. And the more that you proclaim your innocence, the more we're going to say that's evidence that you are, in fact, crazy. But again, that's not how our justice system is supposed to work. It's supposed to be, prove to me that I'm doing something criminal or there's something wrong here that needs to be addressed. It's not that I have to prove my own innocence. I mean, it seems like one of those horror movies, like from the 1950s, those old classic noirs, black and whites, where, the woman's being gassed and she's trying to, come up with a way to find herself, to get herself out of it. Do you think that perhaps is the wrong predicate to be using here, that you have to prove a negative and prove your innocence when that's the exact opposite of how our system's supposed to work?
Exactly. You are essentially, in basically all 50 states, you are, if someone accuses you of being insane and unable, a danger to yourself or others, you are insane until you can prove yourself not insane. But anything you say can and will be used against you in their defense of saying that you're insane. If you say you're not, they say that's denial. And the reality is, again, even if this had been done legally, even if they had actually gone to a court and sought an order, she would neither she nor a representative of her would have been able to be there, to be present, to make the case for why she shouldn't be held against her will. And this is imprisonment. It might be a short-term temporary imprisonment, but this is imprisonment without trial or even any real semblance of due process. Yes, this was an example of them doing it illegally, apparently, and getting a bogus order. But let's say they got a real order. Would that have been any better if they had convinced a judge the same way they convinced these cops that she was insane when she clearly was not? And yes, I do think that there is certainly an element to the fact that she's proclaiming her belief in her savior and that she has the gift of tongues. And for those of us who aren't very religious, that might sound odd, but there are literally tens of millions of Americans and billions of people around the world who believe this. This is hardly proof of insanity. She was clearly not a threat to herself or others, and there was no reason for her to ever be held.
Do you think this also goes back to the wider debate? In the last few years, we've heard a lot more talk about mental health issues, which is good because, of course, it's something we should talk about. But like with anything, it can kind of become politicized and become weaponized. And we see that a lot with the gun control debate, for example, with red flag laws.
Yes.
They'll say, for example, that you are a threat to yourself or others, therefore we have to take your guns. And then they can bypass a lot of these legal safety precautions we have in place, and they take your guns first, and then later you're in the same position as this woman. You're trying to say, no, I'm not crazy, and then you're trying to prove your innocence to the court, and it could take sometimes weeks, months, sometimes years to get your weapons back or your firearms back. It can take, a lot of money to do so. And sometimes, as there was a case, I think it either went to the Supreme Court the other year or it made its way through the courts and was maybe on its way to the Supreme Court. But there was a gun case where there was a wife of a husband, and her and him were kind of on the fritz. They had an argument. She leaves to a hotel. She calls the cops saying he's not his right frame of mind. She says all this stuff. So of course the cops go and they take his guns from him, and now he's trying to play catch up in a similar way. So do you fear that perhaps more, this, when we talk about mental health, if we don't talk about it correctly, it can kind of be used against people, as we're seeing here, perhaps the nanny state saying, oh, we're coming in to save you now?
Mental health is a major problem in the United States, and government is the absolute last entity I trust to deal with it, or anything else for that matter. And we need to look at this that way. Mental health is an issue. I don't think in this case this was a mental health problem. I think that she got caught up in the moment having a religious experience. But even if it was, this did not serve her. She didn't pose any threat to anyone else. The problem with getting government involved is, to government, every problem is just someone's lack of compliance that an officer needs to force into submission. And that's the problem. That's not how you deal with things. It wasn't how to deal with COVID. It's not how to deal with public safety. And it certainly isn't how to deal with mental health. And we need to, whether it's red flag laws or these committing laws, involuntary committing laws, or any of these things, we need to stop trusting government, because what government is going to do is presume that you are in the wrong. They are not going to give you due process, and they're going to err on the side of infringing on your rights because they can. We have to stop letting them do this.
And I think you're exactly right, because then they can look at, all of us have our own, beliefs that are, particular to ourselves. Others might say, oh, that's, beyond the pale. That's kind of crazy and kooky. And then they can relabel that now as mental health. And that's a very scary, as you said, you give the government an inch and they'll take a mile. It leaves us all in a very, dangerous, precarious situation. So Spike, thanks for bringing attention to this. I think you're the only person I saw talking about this. Thanks for joining us tonight.